2019 was the year everything shifted. On screen, Avengers Endgame brought an era of superheroes to a close. Game of Thrones gave us the final season nobody could stop talking about, mostly for the wrong reasons. Billie Eilish went from an unknown teenager to a global phenomenon, and the Joker proved that you could make $1 billion with a villain and a violin. But in the world of politics, the scripts were just as dramatic and just as divisive. It was the year of the biggest parliamentary defeat in history, a Prime Minister's tearful resignation, a Supreme Court declaring the government's actions unlawful unanimously, and a December election that redrew the political map overnight. Boris Johnson stormed into number 10 with a promise to do or die. Nigel Farage made a comeback tour that filled arenas, and the Brexit deadline came and went again. It had betrayals, unlikely alliances, protests in the street, and one voice crack that signalled the end of a premiership. By the end, the question wasn't if Brexit would happen, it was what would Britain become after it did. And to understand how we got there, we're going to have to start at the beginning. When Theresa May was still in charge, the clock was still ticking forwards to 29th of March, and the cracks were already spreading. Join me as we go from start to finish in politics, a year in review. The year opened on a government already on life support. Theresa May was still Prime Minister, still insisting her Brexit deal was the best and only way forward. The problem was, nobody agreed. Not her MPs, not the opposition, and increasingly not even members of her own cabinet. On the January 15th, the inevitable happened. Her deal went to the Commons and suffered a defeat so big it smashed the parliamentary record by a mile. If Parliament had been marking her homework, she wouldn't have just been sent to detention, she would have been expelled.
Order.
The ayes to the right were 24. The noes to the left were 600.
The next day, Jeremy Corbyn pounced, calling for a no-confidence vote.
I therefore, Mr. Speaker, inform you I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government and pass that motion of no confidence in the government.
For a moment, it felt like the walls might finally give way, but May survived, just thanks to the DUP propping her up. It was the political equivalent of being kept alive by a dodgy extension lead. She promised to work with other parties, but her definition of compromise turned out to be my plan but slower. Corbyn refused to talk unless she ruled out a no deal. He didn't, so he didn't. And the stalemate became the opening note of the year. Somewhere in the background, a faint ticking began. 29th of March 2019, the day UK was meant to leave the EU. It was close enough to feel real, and already you could sense that clock would be trouble. If January was about cracks in May's authority, February was going to be the cracks spreading across the entire political class. Brexit negotiations were still frozen in place. May kept promising Brussels that she would get the deal through Parliament. Brussels kept smiling politely and pretending to believe her. Then, something new. 7 Labour MPs quit the party, accusing Corbyn of failing on Brexit and anti-Semitism. They formed the Independent Group, a centrist splinter determined to break the mould, or at least put a dent in it. Within days, 3 Conservative MPs joined them, calling their own party the Blue Kip Brexit Party. It was a small rebellion now, but defection fever had started, and its ripples would be felt later. Meanwhile, May was still chasing the alternative arrangements for the Irish backstop. The EU was unmoved, Corbyn was unmoved, the country mostly unmoved, except for a creeping exhaustion that would define the rest of the year. March 29th was supposed to be Brexit Day, the great escape, the moment the UK cut the cord. Instead, it became the month Westminster perfected the art of moving in circles. On the 12th of March, May brought her deal back for a second meaningful vote. It was rejected again by 149 votes.
The ayes to the right
242. The noes to the left, 391.
The ayes to the right, 242. The noes to the left, 391.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, I profoundly regret the decision that this House has taken tonight. I continue to believe that by far the best outcome is that the United Kingdom leaves the European Union in an orderly fashion with a deal. And that the deal we've negotiated is the best and indeed the only deal available.
The next day, MPs voted to rule out leaving without a deal. Then they voted to ask the EU for an extension. The plan was now officially, don't do it yet. Parliament took control for a day and ran indicative votes, trying every flavour of Brexit on the menu. Customs Union? No. Second referendum? No. No deal? Definitely no. And one thing MPs could agree on was that they didn't agree on anything. Outside, over 1 million people marched through London for a second referendum, while the petition to revoke Article 50 hit 6 million signatures, briefly crashing the Parliament's website. Then came the 29th of March. Instead of leaving, May tried one more time, splitting the withdrawal agreement from the political declaration and putting just the first part to a vote. It was rejected. Again. 3 defeats for the same deal in under 3 months. Each time she lost by a smaller margin. Each time she insisted she was listening, and each time she walked back into number 10 looking a little more hollow. By the end of the month, the EU had pushed the deadline to the 12th of April. It was a stay of execution, not a pardon. With Brexit Day now moving target, April became a long pause. May did one thing that still looked possible: talk to Jeremy Corbyn. It was billed as a national unity. In practice, it was 2 chess players who'd both lost their queens politely nudging the pawns. Labour wanted a permanent customs union and a confirmatory vote. May couldn't promise either without detonating her party. Yet they met again, and again. The headlines called it progress, which was code for stuck. A new date landed: Halloween. The EU granted a flexible extension until the 31st of October, and suddenly the country had 6 more months to argue with itself. Into that vacuum strolled a very familiar silhouette: Nigel Farage. He launched the Brexit Party. Blue branding, simple slogans, and a single pitch. You said we'd leave, we didn't. The anger gelled, holes twitched, and it was the first sign the summer would belong to him. In May, the month not the Prime Minister, the silence turned into inevitability. She tried one last gambit, a new packaging of her Brexit deal, with the promise of a vote on a second referendum if the MPs backed it. It landed with the grace of a piano down a staircase. Brexiteers called it a betrayal. Remainers didn't believe her. Labour shrugged. Cabinet ministers began mentally rehearsing a resignation speech. Then came the local elections. If there was any doubt left, it ended at the ballot box. The Tories lost over 1,000 councillors. Labour somehow lost too. Voters scattered to the Independents and the Lib Dems like a national none of the above. The next morning, the calls for a resignation weren't just whispers anymore. They shouted in corridors, typed in the headlines, muttered on record by ministers who once defended her. And so, on the 24th of May, she stepped outside number 10 and announced that she would stand down. At the end of the speech, her voice cracked. She turned, walked inside, and the door closed.
Ever since I first stepped through the door behind me as Prime Minister, I have striven to make the United Kingdom a country that works not just for a privileged few, but for everyone, and to honour the result of the EU referendum. I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
The leadership race began before the microphones had cooled. June was the scramble. Too many candidates, nowhere to look, but one name loomed above them all: Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson didn't do so much campaign as Orbit. He avoided tricky interviews, picked his moments, and let the myth of Boris do the lifting. The message was simple enough to chant: get Brexit done. His rivals flailed, and the MPs' ballots whittled them down just to two: Jeremy Hunt versus Boris Johnson. While the party shrank its choice, another result landed: the European elections. The Conservatives were wiped out, Labour limped, the Brexit Party won the popular vote. Protests, yes, but also a warning flare. By mid-July, the contest was over and Boris Johnson had won by a landslide.
There will be people around the place who will question the wisdom of your decision. And there may even be some people here who still wonder what they have done.
Theresa May left quietly. Boris arrived with a grin and a do-or-die promise for the 31st of October.
And so I am standing before you today to tell you, the British people, that those critics are wrong. The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again. The people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts because we're going to restore trust in our democracy. And we're going to fulfil the repeated promises of Parliament to the people and come out of the EU on October the 31st. No ifs or buts.
Within a day, he had reshaped his cabinet into a band of loyalists. Dominic Cummings was at his side. Summer recess came, but so did the plotting of a showdown with Parliament. On the 28th of August, Boris made his move, proroguing Parliament for 5 weeks. Officially, it was a new legislative addenda. Unofficially, it looked like dodging scrutiny with the clock running out.
Because the exceptional length of the prorogation in this case is strong evidence that the Prime Minister's motive was to silence Parliament for that period because he sees Parliament as an obstacle to the furtherance of his political aims.
Protests erupted, legal challenges began, and the Supreme Court prepared to rule. September opened with Parliament back in session and ready for war. MPs passed the Benn Act, forcing Boris to seek an extension if no deal was agreed by mid-October. He expelled 21 Tory MPs for defying him, erasing his majority in one night. Parliament was prorogued, and 2 weeks later the Supreme Court ruled 11-0 that it was unlawful. Parliament returned. Boris, bruised and unshaken, doubled down. Brexit would happen on the 31st of October. It didn't. October was a game of chess with Parliament, the EU and the calendar. Boris got a new deal from Brussels, but MPs delayed the approval. The Benn Act forced him to request another extension to the 31st of January 2020. That's when he decided the deadlock would only be broken by the voters. On the 6th of November, Parliament agreed to a general election. Boris pitched Get Brexit Done until it was muscle memory.
That is paralysed, blocked, generally incapable of digestive function as an anaconda that has swallowed a tapir. Neither moving one way or the other, if you see what I mean. This Parliament just refuses to get Brexit done. So we get Brexit done. Let's get Brexit done, my friends.
Corbyn offered a renegotiated deal and a referendum. Nigel Farage threatened to run candidates everywhere unless Boris backed a no deal. He later stood them down and the Tory seats, but not the Labour ones.
After the announcement that we were going to be putting country before party and standing down in constituencies,
the campaign rolled into December, and on election night, the exit polls at 10 p.m. was a gut punch.
The most disastrous result for the Labour Party, the worst result since 1935.
Conservative landslide. By morning, it was real, an 80-seat majority. Labour had suffered its worst defeat since 1935. Corbyn announced he'd step down. In Scotland, the SNP dominated, reigniting independence calls. In Northern Ireland, nationalists outnumbered unionists for the very first time. Brexit was now certain. On the 31st of January 2020, the UK would leave the EU. 2019 closed with Boris Johnson walking back into number 10, and the one thing Theresa May never had, the numbers to do exactly what he wanted. What he did with them, well, that would be a story for the next year. A year that would bring a trade deal battle, a resurgent independence movement, and a crisis no one in the election night crowd could see coming. one that would change the shape of politics and life in ways none of them could imagine. The next day, Jeremy Corbyn failing on Brexit and anti-Semitism. If there was any doubt left, it ended the ballot box. Boris Johnson didn't so much as campaign as Boris Johnson didn't do so much campaign prologuing part on the 28th of